Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on light here, Sunday morning, 13th of March. Let's hope we're going to get the Outsiders.
J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, has attracted controversy regarding her portrayal of Native American magicians. I don't know if you guys heard of this. Navajo writer Brian Young wrote on Twitter that he was heartbroken about the new piece of writing. And J.K. Rowling, he said, reflected not my beliefs, and my beliefs are not fantasy. It's one of those things where it's not part of the books, though, is it? It's part of the website, I believe, Pottermore?
It's part of the Potterverse.
The Potterverse,
it's
that's the whole
fleshing
thing.
out the entire universe and the backstory.
All right, and so she's focusing on Native American magicians, and she's doing that fleshing out as you do. And Native American commentators have said that this was racist and her portrayal was offensive. And my problem with that is, if she hadn't written that, then people would have said that, oh, what we're missing from the story. But once you do write that, now they're not happy with the portrayal within the story. Well, people are just never going to be happy.
Sorry, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think one of the issues that we've seen is that, because young adult, especially fantasy stuff, it's so geared around the idea of being special or being chosen, and obviously witches and wizards in the Harry Potter universe have a role in that. I mean, which kid who grew up reading Harry Potter didn't want to get the Hogwarts letter when they turned 11? I mean, it's such a big
I'm still waiting for it. I'm 37 now.
But I mean, I guess the alternative was that, as you say, they would be missing altogether, and I think that's worse. I mean, I know that when I read the Harry Potter books, and there were the Patil twins, not the world's best representation of Indian ethnicity people, but they existed, and they were witches, and they were really cool witches. And if you're a kid reading that, I feel like that's more important, just being visible rather than necessarily having the perfect representation. I mean, let's not forget that the people who kicked up a big stink about it are adults, really. I mean, it's a different thing for them.
I feel really strongly that writers should be able to write, and use their imagination and use the information in the world at hand to inform their fiction work. However, First Nations people totally have the right to be frustrated by the use of stereotypes and the use of appropriation of their culture. I think this was a well-intentioned but very clumsily executed attempt to be perhaps more representative and broad. It's disappointing that it was perhaps not as well researched or appropriate, or even three-dimensional.
It was well-intentioned. Mark, where do you stand on this?
Well, where do I stand on Skinwalkers and Wizards? Well,
yeah, where do we all, really?
Yeah, exactly. This is only a story because J.K. Rowling's got a name across it. I agree with both Trish and Kate here. I mean, she couldn't win. She either had to put it in and be accused of cultural appropriation, or she had to leave it out and probably be accused of plagiarism. But essentially, I think we have to keep some perspective here. Although, I mean, she's used the ideas which were critical to the Navajo tradition. It's not as if they've been, it was derogatory, it didn't invite ridicule, it wasn't disrespectful.
Right.
But it was, as Kate said, very clumsy.
Yeah, I think well-intentioned is the thing there. Thank you so much. That was Professor Mark Abbott, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Business Economics at Macquarie University, Kate Larson, the Director of Writers Victoria, and Trisha Jha, Policy Analyst at the Center for Independent Studies. And that brings us to the end of RN Sunday Extra for this week. If you've missed anything today, Sunday Extra podcast is available on our website. You'll find us on iTunes. Also, the last hour of the program is on SoundCloud, and then there's the ABC Radio app. Sunday Extra is there too. Senior producer for Sunday Extra is Sepil Chanelmish, with producers Michelle Weeks and Mike Woods, and interns Mara Adler-Giles and Claudine Chong. Matthew Crawford is our resident birder, and this morning's technical producer was John Jacobs. Next week.
Okay, let's not go to the news. Oh, maybe we might. Might be something interesting there.
Good morning, Deborah Rice with the 10 o'clock news. The future of 550 workers at Clive Palmer's North Queensland nickel refinery remains.
No, not particularly interested in that. I thought they might have been leading off with the Australian Bureau of Statistics little bombshell that they dropped on the Liberal National Government. It seems that in the 3 years since Tony Abbott was elected in 2013, Australia has undergone an epidemic of suicide. Up 13% in 3 years. Now, I take a bit of interest in suicide statistics. I've heard people saying that the Australian suicide death rate is twice the road toll. It's now more than twice the road toll. This week we've achieved 12 suicides per 100,000, and there's 24 million of us. So 2,880 Australians check themselves out every year. 3.5 Australians die every day on the roads. 1 woman dies every week at the hands of a domestic violence incident with a partner or an ex-partner. 1 woman a week. 3.5 Australians a day on the roads. 8 Australians a day kill themselves. And that's up from 7 since Tony Abbott was elected 3 years ago. Now, another interesting thing about suicides is that some people are at a higher risk than others. I mean, combat veterans, they have twice the suicide death rate of the background population annually. Children of combat veterans, they have 3 times the suicide death rate annually compared to the background population. Adolescent homosexuals in New South Wales country towns, they have 6 times the suicide death rate of the background population. According to Melbourne University School of Medicine, which did a long-running study examining the life outcomes of people who'd been sexually assaulted as children between 1965 and I think 1985, survivors of child sexual assault have 18 times the annual average death rate from suicide, and they also have 48 times the annual average death rate from accidental overdoses. And whether they die from overdoses or whether they die from suicide, their deaths cluster 18 years after the abusive incident. So if we got a sudden spike in suicides in Australia in 2013 when Tony Abbott came in, okay, it is possibly quite fair to say that everything his government did in terms of cutting money to public mental health and homeless youth support and legal aid and Aboriginal legal aid and social work and community health safety networks, everything he did made life more difficult for anybody who was poor or young or unemployed or suffering any kind of mental distress or disability. He did do that. But to get such a sudden spike in suicides, you've got to look a little bit beyond what happened at the same time as the suicides to make sure that nobody had any support mechanisms. What happened 18 years before Tony Abbott was elected and the suicide spike occurred? John Winston Howard was elected Prime Muppet. And he wanted Australia to be relaxed and comfortable. And 18 years after he came in, there's a sudden 13% upsurge in suicides. So does this mean that when John Howard became Prime Minister, he made the country relaxed and comfortable for pedophiles and that there was a sudden upsurge in paedophilia under John Winston Howard? I mean, that was when he got an archbishop who had to be later cashiered due to a child sex scandal cover-up story as the Australian Governor-General, wasn't it? I'm sure we had a bishop for a Governor-General there for a while under Johnny Howard. It was when Cardinal Pell was doing all of his, which teacups got the pedophile priest in it as he moves the infractors, the offenders, the perpetrators around his parishes. Well, the people over here know that he's a pedophile, so we'll just put him over there where nobody knows and, tell him to calm down and he'll be a good boy. And he says he'll be, oh, look, he's done it here. Yeah, that was all happening on Johnny Howard's watch. So did we have a 13% upswing in paedophilia when John Howard came into power? And is that what's suddenly causing the 13% upswing in suicides under the Abbott-Turnbull regime? It's a hypothesis that has a certain amount of data to back it, but I don't know how you could really do a falsifiable experiment to prove it as a theory. But from where I'm sort of sitting here and I've had the time and the leisure to listen to the radio for 20, 25 years, yeah, Tony Abbott didn't really want to do anything much about pedophilia in Australia. You know, like he wanted to worry about people who were throwing babies overboard, or you know, he said that dope was for dopes, and he got everybody to get a speed habit instead because it made them work harder and drive their truck faster up the road or something, and it was easier to maintain, you know, manufacture in a bathtub, and you didn't have to have greenhouses or anything like that, and it was pretty easy to smuggle and carry on. And yeah, that's what he did. Johnny Howard got everybody off pot, not a speed. And, you know, well, okay, now that's turned into ice, and they're not real impressed with the way people who use ice sometimes use too much of it, and some of the people who use too much of it develop amphetamine psychosis, say 6 months or maybe 3 months after they first start using too much. Whereas with the old-fashioned amphetamine, it might have taken them 5 years or so to become an amphetamine psychotic and have a nervous breakdown. But there's been such a dramatic withdrawal, reduction, cutback in funding for mental health under the Liberal national governments at state and federal level that apparently the only people who are able to rescue themselves or their kids from amphetamine psychosis from too much ice, crystal methamphetamine, there are private clinics. And the private clinics only cost $1,000 a day. And you only have to put up a month's fees in advance in order to get yourself or your little darling booked in there. And if the person concerned runs away 2 days into the month and you've paid for the month, well, that's sort of tough bickies, mate. You know, that's how it goes. So we've got a much more savage drug that's out there. We've got more people coming through the system who are apparently more traumatised, and they're starting to have a peak in deaths 18 years after Howard. You know, we just hit the 20 years since Howard was elected, fanfare and all the rest of it. Well, what's his legacy been, you know? He got us involved in invading Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's now an epidemic of suicide in Australia, just at the right period in time for it to have coincided with a rise in pedophilia when Johnny Howard was Prime Minister. How relaxed and comfortable was he when he was inventing stories about how evil the refugees were for throwing babies into the ocean in order to get the Navy to rescue them so that they could come into Australia? He won an election on that. And then instead of doing something to try and support Aborigines to maintain their culture, he declared war on the Aborigines, floated a story involving little children being sacred, and because somewhere in the Northern Territory, some Aboriginal children had been said to have suffered from child abuse, he put the army into the Northern Territory. He intervened. And they have not yet prosecuted anybody as a result of the intervention in the Northern Territory, yet it was such a vitally necessary thing to do that he literally declared war on the citizenry and suspended the Racial Discrimination Act for the purposes of the Northern Territory Intervention Act. If you want to wear army boots when you go and kick blackfellas up the arse for being black, it's okay. It's an intervention. Happily, we've seen the demise of the dickhead who thought that one up, Mal Bruff. He's had to leave politics because the federal police are investigating him. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that little insight into Australia's suicide epidemic. 8 a day, and 6 a day of the 8 a day are men. Men who are just too depressed to want to continue living in the world that they and their parents and grandparents have made for them under the circumstances that the government is running it at the moment. And when people say that it's really fucking hard being a woman married to a man because one woman per week gets killed, just bear in mind 6 blokes per day are killing themselves out of the 8 people in Australia who kill themselves per day. Thank you, Johnny Howard. Thank you, Tony Abbott. Thank you, Malcolm Turning Bull and the Liberal National Party and your entire worldview. This is what you are giving Australia. This is your legacy. A suicide epidemic. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.